Hi, Body Messiah. Now we're getting ready for another lesson that we're going to cover from Surgical Bible Studies. And in this lesson, we're going to address the rift that we see appearing um, in between the older and younger generation of Black and Brown Hebrews, who, as we state over and over again, some who may be awakened to who we are as a people, and even some who are not. We decided to do this because you see an overall decrease in attendance in churches and congregations in general, but we wanted to address it as part of the prophecies in Ezekiel 37 is being fulfilled. We want to explain for those who may not understand why this rift is happening or occurring, this dynamic in which the older generation doesn't understand the younger generation much, and they have to be awakened to, for the most part, a lot of the older generation because they're set in their ways. So the title of this lesson is called Messiah's Body. Are Black Churches Dying? Okay? So from the appearance and the onset of what we see, this is very well true. But this dynamic is true across the board throughout the United States in all congregations, including white congregation. There's a time of a great awakening occurring with Black and brown people throughout the U.S., acknowledging who we are, but also for the Gentiles, and understanding that there has been a huge deception that has occurred. And as they begin to realize who we are as a people, they begin to distance themselves from all of those congregations that are foundationally filled with man-made doctrines, because they're trying to turn back to the whole truth of Adonai's word. That's just the way it is. We're going to keep our focus, though, on mainly Black, brown churches throughout the United States and explaining the dynamic of what's happening and going on. And so we will later have a reading of the scripture from Nehemiah chapter 10 and some from chapter 30. So we'll discuss it later. But I would like for you guys on your own time to go and read 2 Kings chapter 22 and then Nehemiah chapter 10, chapter 13 and 30. And it'll kind of explain what is happening as the prophecy in Ezekiel 37 is being fulfilled, where these dry bones, when we're coming alive and turning back to the entire standards of Adonai's word. But in this dynamic, you'll notice that there's a steady decline in the congregation of congregations being led by men who were in their prime during the civil rights era. Okay? And you'll see some instances where some of the elders who come from this generation of the civil rights era, who are in their prime, who know who we are, and they led the way in opening up all these open up all these truths and laying them before other descendants of Israel, being very pivotal in waking us up. So, but it's very few in that congregation or in that group of people in that age group. What we have listed here is just a few points to show the difference in what's happening now. Okay, you have that younger generation who overwhelmingly are finding out who we are. And a part of that is causing them to be so fulfilled and satisfied in their spirit to a point where the older generation or congregation, when they're not acknowledging these facts of the Bible and the fulfillment of these prophecies and who we are, they cannot quench that fire for the Ruach HaKodesh that the young generation is seeking out. So we're going to look at the difference between the younger and older generation here. And we will at the end have a reading from some of the scriptures in Nehemiah. So you'll understand how zealous some of these who are awakened to who we are, especially from the younger generation, are becoming. Okay? Now, even with them becoming zealous, or many of us who have become awakened, becoming zealous, we cannot, it is not honorable in Adonai's eyes for us to kick to the curb all the people who have not come into this great awakening yet. Okay? Adonai Elohim had patience for us to awaken. So it's not right for us, because we've come to an understanding of who we are, to disregard and cast out everyone who has not yet, being actual descendants of Israel, come into this full understanding. Okay? When you look in Ezekiel, the prophecy given in Ezekiel, and even in parts of Jeremiah, where it talks about Adonai regathering the descendants of Israel, and even when you look at the prophecy where he talks about the branch of Judah and Israel combining together, Ephraim, they're coming back together. Okay? There was a rift between some of these tribes, and Adonai is unifying them overwhelmingly across the board. Do you not understand that we've been scattered across the four corners of the earth in various different countries, and we may not have the exact same beliefs, but Adonai is going to bring us together in one spirit of truth, in worship and honoring him and the truth of his word. So it's going to happen. But just don't get too overzealous and then forget that just as Adonai had patience for us, he also has patience for those who have not been awakened yet. Okay? I just wanted to make that side note, buddy. Sorry. As we can see here, what we see overwhelmingly in the younger generation and those who've been awakened is that we fully acknowledge that we're the dry bones. Okay? We're the dry bones that the prophet spoke to eons ago, and the prophets are speaking to now, for us to come together and being filled. Our flesh is coming back on our bone. There is an army being built, an army of Adonai's children, the children of Israel, that's being established. And as we're becoming established, we're going back to ways where we will never depart back from. Okay? Now, what you see on the older generation side, a lot of times in these congregations, these leaders have been, ingrained to have a set path of ministry that's based on the standard of seminary schools, right? They've been taught from standards that came from our oppressors overwhelmingly. In biblical time, you didn't have seminary schools that you had to attend to prove that you were a pastor or a leader. No, God ordained you and called you forward. And this is what's happening in this next generation as Adonai is spiritually ordaining and even marking his children, right? The men who are going to lead the ministry and who are going to minister to this current and next generation, right? But this indoctrination is so deep and heavy, okay? I do not disregard the ministry that Martin Luther King had or Malcolm X had. I do not disregard those at all. They were extremely pivotal, and they sacrificed their lives in doing things that were honorable in the sight of the Most High God, and watching out for Adonai's children, the actual children of Israel, the poor, the needy, the fatherless, okay? Amongst the organizations in which they served, at the core, it was a time in which all congregations and the people in the congregation and the black and brown community worked together to help nurture that current generation of that time and build the community back up, okay? But just because some are still indoctrinated and been kind of ingrained in their head these man-made doctrines or ways of ministry, doesn't mean they can't change. Adonai is calling forth people even out of the Muslim religion that are descendants of Israel, calling them forth for such a time as this. Do you not think he has the same mercy on those who are been indoctrinated in man-made doctrines in those so-called churches and Christian organizations? He has that for them too. But that's where a big rift is coming from, okay? The point we make over and over again inside your code Bible studies is the younger generation is understanding clearly who the chosen people are based on Deuteronomy chapter 28. But in the older generation, a lot of times they have a hard time reconciling the atrocities of slavery and oppression. They can clearly speak if you finally get them to settle down and talk about their past history and the hardships that they went through and that they observed and what they saw that happened to their forefathers, their mother, father, or grandparents, okay? Because we're not far removed from Jim Crow and all the oppressions that happened during that time in that generation. But when it comes to combining that with the prophecies that came in Adonai's word, they want to try and shy away from it because they feel like we have to minister and our ministry has to be about the peaceful and good and happy things. And that's just not the case. Okay? Once again, that's a part of the indoctrination of the way the word of God was being taught that came from a lot of our oppressors. All right? Now, when we look at this younger generation, they don't care too much about voting. And I'll explain why. And I sympathize with them in that greatly. Okay? They realize voting has not drastically improved systemic oppression. And it has not. Since the Voting Rights Acts and all this stuff that Martin Luther King was fighting for and a lot of descendants of Africans and African slaves were fighting for, you're talking about over 50, 60 years basically. And you still see systemic oppression being intact and continuously being pushed upon our people 60 years later. No matter what political party is in place, no matter what organization is heading up the Senate or the House of Representatives or any government structure, okay? Individual people hearts have to change in order for this whole systemic pattern of oppression to be broken. Okay? And so the only solution that they realize comes from holding on to the standards of Adonai's word so that we will be under his shield of protection. We will be his anointed children and people who follow him, and he will destroy any strongholds that try to come against us. He made a promise to us in Deuteronomy chapter 30. And they're fully aware of all the blessings. Just like the curses came to pass, all the blessings from in Deuteronomy chapter 30 will come to pass as long as we abide by his standards. Okay? In this group, in this generation, a lot of them are so adamant and they believe voting is the only way to incorporate improvements in the black community. They feel like this is the biggest vote of how we improve. The younger generation is sitting back going like it hasn't been much changing because they realize systemic oppression is an individual man's decision, man and woman throughout all systems from the public and the private organizations. But because this was such a heavy battle to fight for rights to vote for black and brown people, they still have this fight on the forefront of their mind. Even now today, when you see all this redistricting and all this stuff happening, let me tell you something. Adonai is going to make a transition where the actual children of Israel will overtake the gates of their enemies because he said so. And even if the political systems will war against what's supposed to come to pass based on even the standards that they claim we should uphold as far as voting and doing what was right, and now they're battling and they're trying to redistrict stuff, God will destroy the enemy and their system, even if that means he removed people completely from that system, okay? And that is with or without voting. Okay, out of all these things, this younger generation realize we are soldiers and children of the Most High, and it doesn't matter what the government systems do. When God says it's time, and he will destroy. He has always throughout history built up kingdoms and tore them down. Okay? Think about how the beast system and the government systems all over throughout the world, especially those who have colonized, have broken every treaty that they have offered every indigenous people in every country that they colonized and overtaken. So this realization is so at the forefront of the younger generation's mind. But they know nothing can outdo the creator of the universe. Okay? So this rift is going to continue for a while. Okay? Now when we look here in number 4, this younger generation that is being awakened is fully aware of there are groups of people who work continuously against the children of Israel for their detriment. And when you look in Deuteronomy chapter 23, it speaks about the Ammonites, Moabites, and Amalekites. Okay? So not everybody you're supposed to seek peace from. You're supposed to shield and protect your family as best to your capabilities under the umbrella and protection of the Most High God. And you can't trust wholeheartedly everyone. People who are of this heritage will seek to destroy the children of Israel. Okay? They have a hateful spirit. And God specifically says you are never to seek some of these group of people their shalom. He said he's going to blot out the names of the Amalekites forever. Okay? So that's a problem. But when you look at the older generation, because of what they've been indoctrinated in these, the way our oppressors have taught the word and instructed them in seminary school, they believe everyone is your brother. Okay? And they really believe this is the mentality that our Messiah had. Body Messiah, you must realize that Adonai knew that we would have to be warned from days of old, right? And even our Messiah knew those who were worker of iniquity in their spirit. There were groups of people amongst the Pharisees and the scribes that he called a brood of vipers. He would say to certain people that your father is the devil. We don't have the same daddy, okay? Your father is Satan, the devil. And that doesn't mean you trust everyone and everyone is your brother. He's very well of those people amongst that heritage were the ones who set in structures in order to have him put to death. All right? But he gave up his life willingly. Now, when you look here in verse 5, in number 5, this younger generation and those who are awakened and knowing who they are, it allows them to be at peace and moving and removing the traditions of man or man-made doctrine. They're okay. They're comfortable with it. It doesn't mean they're going to villainize everybody that partake in it. It's just saying they are choosing to move closer to Adonai's standard. And that includes his holy days, his Moedim. Okay? You'll see that a lot of the older generation that are upholding some of these congregations are fearful of moving away from the traditions of man. But keep in mind the traditions of man that were in place were established by the beast system. Okay? So they're going to have to come out of the whore of Babylon and by pushing away from this. Body of Messiah, all that we can do for those of us who are awakened, who are still scattered amongst these congregations because we want to fellowship and we have not found our home. We don't want to forsake the assembling of ourselves. And so still you're going to find in some of these other congregations people who know who we are, who are amongst it. But I pray for those. I pray for them that they stay strong. And just be honest and be truthful about how you feel as far as man-made doctrines. When the congregation want to celebrate Easter, just say, no, I'm celebrating Passover with my family at home. Or when they want to do things like even something as crazy as Halloween, like no, because it glorifies the death and the Satan and witchcraft and all that other stuff. No, I won't do that, That's the reason why, The more and more people begin to call out these things, that are man-made doctrines that do not abide by Adonai's standard, slowly but surely those who are children of the Most High will move away from that also, including the congregation. Okay, body inside, I want to mention this. This generation that's being awakened have a spirit that's like King Josiah and the generation that are mentioned in Nehemiah here, okay? They are zealous for turning back to the word of God and his standard, and they called on the whole house of Israel, especially the Levitical priesthood, to turn back to it. Once they did not know the standards of God and they began to open the books back up and review them, they became very zealous in honoring the Most High. And so that's what you're going to find amongst this generation. You know, don't bash them and say, oh, they're not honoring God because they're not going to church or what have you. No, they will not deal with a lot of fakery. And as they're turning wholeheartedly back to Adonai, they're not going to pretend, okay? But just sit back and observe. Every generation has had to fight for what they know. As we hold on, you can pause the video, and we're going to have a reading of the word from Nehemiah chapter 10 and also chapter 13, okay? So you can understand the mindset that's going on for those who are zealous and turning wholeheartedly back to Adonai.
Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 29. Now the rest of the people, the Kohanim, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the temple servants, and all who had separated themselves from the peoples of the lands for the sake of the Torah of God, along with their wives, their sons, and their daughters, who were able to understand, all joined their brothers the nobles, and entered into a curse and an oath to walk in the Torah of God, given through Moses, the servant of God, to keep and do all the mitzvot of Adonai our God, along with his ordinances and his statutes. Furthermore, we will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land, and we will not take their daughters for our sons. When the peoples of the lands bring any merchandise or any kind of grain on Shabbat, we will not buy from them on Shabbat or on a holy day. Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 1. On that day, the scroll of Moses was read out loud in the hearing of the people. The command was found written in it that no Amorite or Moabite should ever enter into the assembly of God forever. For they did not meet Bnei Israel with bread or water, but instead hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. When they heard the Torah, they separated from Israel, all of mixed ancestry. Verse 20. Once or twice the traders of those selling all kinds of merchandise camped outside Jerusalem. But I warned them and said to them, why are you camping next to the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time they no longer came on the Shabbat. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves, to come and guard the gates in order to sanctify Yom Shabbat. Remember this also on my behalf, O my God, and have compassion on me according to the greatness of your loving kindness. In those days I also saw Jews who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Half of their children spoke the dialect of Ashdod, or the language of other peoples, but none of them understood the language of Judah. So I rebuked them. I cursed them, beat some of their men, and pulled their beards. I made them swear by God, saying, you shall never give your daughters to the sons, or take their daughters for your sons, or for yourselves. Didn't Solomon, king of Israel, sin about these things? Yet among many nations there was never any king like him. Yes, he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused him to sin. Must we hear about doing all this great evil, hereby being unfaithful with our God by marrying foreign women? Now one of the sons of Jodiah, son of Elishib, the Kohen Gadol, was son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. So I drove him from me. O my God, please remember them for the defilement of the priesthood as well as the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. So I urged them from everything foreign, and I assigned duties for the Kohanim and the Levites, each to his own task, and from the wood offering at appointed times for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good.
Okay, Body Messiah, someone would like to reread Nehemiah chapter 13, starting with verse 29 over again.
Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 29. O my God, please remember them for the defilement of the priesthood as well as the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. So I purged them, not urged them, from everything foreign. And I assigned duties for the Kohanim and the Levites, each to his own task, and for the wood offering at appointed times, and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good.
Okay, Body Messiah, as we can see in Nehemiah chapter 10 and Nehemiah 13, the Levitical priesthood was not playing at all. No games, no joke. I mean, even to the point that if somebody was coming on Shabbat to do any trade or barter or selling food, even if they were outside of the tribe of Judah trying to come as sellers, Nehemiah, the Levitical priesthood, he said, I would lay hands on you if you come over here again. So it was serious. They became so zealous that it says in the scripture that they entered into a curse. I'm not extremely sure exactly what that means, but for me, Tasha, I believe that meant they added extra stipulations of how they felt. If anybody crossed the line and began to allow their sons or daughter to marry a mixed heritage, anyone amongst the Levitical priesthood who did services amongst the temple, okay? So that's what I believe that meant. So that meant that it was critical. If they engaged in that activity, I don't know if people were put to death or if they were cast out, okay? But it was very dire and serious. Even when they turned back and they remembered that the Ammonites and the Moabites were never to be amongst the descendants of Israel, especially the ones who did service in the temple, the Levitical priesthood, never amongst that assembly, okay? And so they became very adamant to the point where, it would be a serious problem. We were supposed to not be with them and separated from them. They even remembered someone who was a son-in-law of a Honorite, Sanballat, who had done atrocities against the descendants of Israel, trying to destroy them and prevent them from building up the temple. So it was serious. He even recalled back to what happened with King Solomon, with all his different wives who were of heritage that were not descendants of Israel, that pulled him into sin and idolatry. This generation is going to be just as adamant, Body Messiah. So older generation, don't take offense, okay? This is for our shield and our protection for them to want to desire to draw closer to the Most High. So don't get offended if they're very zealous about it, They just, out of all the things our people have suffered, they just want us safe and secure, okay? So don't get shocked if they're looking at someone strangely, if they're trying to come at descendants of Israel in a harsh way. I think that's a part of what happened during that Montgomery brawl. Well, Body Messiah, this is the end of this lesson. I hope you learned something from it and gleaned something from it. And like we always say to you, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you all, and envelop you all with his shalom peace. Goodbye.